I am very happy to introduce our eminent Professor Manu Mangattu. A poet in heart dies in art, he says. He's a poet, he's a lyricist, an editor, a film critic, um, publishing expert, and a research consultant. He has edited 20 volumes with reputed publishers like Penguin, Harvard University Printing Press, Routledge Publishers, and so on. He has published more than 9 books, 79 international research publications, 97 academic publications, and lots of poetry collections. As a professor, in his stint as a professor, he has done many UGC funded research projects. One such example for the research project is in 2017 he has completed a research on a research on Sachin Tendulkar as an aesthetic experience, and he has done MOOC course on romantic literature, and currently Manu Mangattu sir offers free net coaching for economically backward students through online mode. And I request Professor Manu Mangattu sir to deliver his special address on the topic Understanding Epistemic Violence, the Herd and the Unheard. I invite you, sir. The session is open to you.
Thank you, Mahesh. Am I audible? Am I visible?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Okay. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here on this day, and I'm really thankful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak on this wonderful platform to talk on a topic that is much relevant, but something that is always in the margins, subaltern literature. And I express my thanks to the college, the management, JP College of Arts and Science, and of course my newly acquired friend Mahesh Raja. He has been a wonderful friend of mine, so friendly, so approachable, so nice, such a nice human being to interact with. So thank you, Mahesh, for this the camaraderie that you have shown over the past many days when we started discussing about this lecture and conference. It was wonderful being with you all in this college and with this department of English. Now I guess I shall get ahead with my lecture. Our seminar, our conference is on subalternity, borders and borderlands, and I mean it couldn't have been better because we had an introductory session by someone across the borders, and he enlightened us a lot of things about borders and borderlands, and I was dumbstruck at his ideas on Indian literature in English. It was very enlightening, and I especially liked one of the questions that somebody posed. The question was, can we have a globe without borders? That was a lovely question, a question that people have been asking for many years. Robert Frost brought forth this question, and he tried to answer it in his own way when he spoke about, when he wrote mending walls, what I am walling in and walling out, and to whom I am like to give offense. So but yeah, there are these are questions that we need to always discuss, more than find answers to the questions, to keep these questions in discussion, in the debate, is the beauty of it all. So, coming to my topic, understanding epistemic violence, the herd, the unheard, and the subaltern. I'm sure you might have taken a peep at the topic and have thought, is it an A missing in the herd and the unheard? It is not an A missing. It is an attempt, a naive attempt by an amateur to play with words. So, the herd, the unheard, and the subaltern. Understanding epistemic violence. So, my dear friends, I'm sure all of us here would be very familiar with the idea of epistemic violence, because we are here to discuss subalternity, and most of us would be very familiar with Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak and her seminal essay published in 1988, Can the Subaltern Speak? Actually, a remake, or it was originally a lecture that she delivered in 1984 and 83, and it was later published in 1988. And it is in this essay that Spivak, brings this issue of epistemic violence to our attention. So, before going into Spivak, I would just like to take you through the meanings of the words episteme and violence. You know what violence is. We all commit a lot of violence, and we all have been, the subject and the object, the offender and the receiver of so many acts of violence. But what is this episteme? The word episteme, when we discuss these modern, postmodern theorists, especially people like Foucault, we always come across this word episteme. Episteme is simply of or relating to knowledge. It is about knowledge. Episteme is about knowing. It is about the cognitive. So, epistemic, something that is related to knowledge. So, what is epistemic violence? Violence committed or violence exerted against or through knowledge. Violence, it could be violence against knowledge, or it could be violence committed through the use of knowledge. That is, in simple terms, that is epistemic violence. The term was introduced especially to post-colonial studies by Spivak in her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? But if you go a little further back, you can find that Michel Foucault developed the idea of the episteme in Western thought in two of his books, History of Madness, a very important book where he speaks about something that most of us are familiar with, insanity. History of Madness, there he developed, initiated the discussion on the episteme, and he explored it further in his book, The Order of Things. Now, epistemic violence is violence exerted or against or through the use of knowledge. It is a key element in any process of domination. So, if you want to apply your domination, if you want to dominate, you have to dominate using episteme. You have to dominate using knowledge, and it is not only through the construction of exploitative economic links or social, political or military apparatuses that domination is accomplished. No, we should never think that domination is all about military, domination is all about political influence, domination is about economic control. No, most importantly, domination is domination is manifest through the construction of epistemic frameworks. And what do these epistemic knowledge related frameworks do? They legitimize and enshrine the practices of domination. So what do? Using this knowledge, the dominant groups, what do? They legitimize and enshrine the practices they do to exert their domination. See the idea. Episteme, knowledge, you use knowledge to control, to dominate, and you try to tell people, you try to make people understand that these practices that I use to control you are legitimate, and for that I again use knowledge. Epistemic frameworks are used, and again it is at the same time it is a process of legitimation and delegitimation. What is legitimized? If I am the perpetrator, if I am the dominant, then my ideals are legitimized, and you, the dominated, the oppressed, your ideas are delegitimized. This is what happens in epistemic violence. Epistemic violence, Sebastian Garde in 2013, he wrote a wonderful thesis on, especially on epistemic violence, and he said epistemic violence is a forced delegitimation, sanctioning, and repression of certain possibilities of knowledge, certain possibilities of knowing. Certain knowledges are delegitimized, sanctioned, repressed, going hand in hand with an attempted enforcement or legitimation of other possibilities of knowing. So one possibility of knowing is legitimized, while another possibility of knowledge that was existent has been delegitimized. We know what these things mean, right? Because we know Spivak spoke about whether the subaltern can speak and all. She spoke about it in the context of the colonial enterprise, and how the colonial powers, the imperial powers, made the East or the colonized the other. So what happened? The knowledge, the frameworks of knowledge that were existent in colonies were delegitimized, while the frameworks of knowledge that the Britishers or the colonized propounded, they put forth, these frameworks of knowledge were legitimized. And in 1999, Andrew Norman came out with his version of epistemic violence, and it is a very beautiful definition. I will read it for you. Epistemic violence is not ordinarily thought of as violence. Epistemic violence, we don't usually consider it as violence. Why? It is too respectable, too academic, too genteel for that. It is done in a way that you don't feel violence is done, but it is violence all the time, all the same, and deserves to be seen for what it is. It is not thought of as violence because it is very respectable, very academic, too genteel, but the thing is, it is still violence. And coming to Spivak, what exactly does Gayatri Spivak say in her celebrated essay? Spivak says this: the clearest available example of such epistemic violence is the remotely orchestrated, far-flung and heterogeneous project to constitute the colonial subject as the other. Othering, the process of othering happens, the self versus the other. The essay Can the Subaltern Speak is a deconstructive essay. It is a deconstructive practice, and a lot of binary opposites, a lot of dichotomies are being deconstructed and subverted by Spivak in that seminal essay. And one such dichotomy is the self versus other, or the colonized versus the colonizer dichotomy. So Spivak says this project that is known as epistemic violence is also the asymmetrical obliteration of the trace of that other in its precarious subjectivity. You take the knowledge systems of the colonized And what do? You systematically obliterate, completely delete, make, delegitimize, sanction the frameworks of knowledge of the colonized, and turn them into the other, and their precarious subjectivity is also systematically and asymmetrically obliterated. So for Spivak, what the West does is to commit epistemic violence by actively obstructing and undermining non-Western methods or approaches to knowledge. This colonialist subjugation of non-Western knowledge is a way of, constituting the colonial subject as the other. The dominant Western narrative, Spivak says, is palimpsestic. You might remember the word palimpsestic, where she is about to mention Foucault in the essay. So she says the Western narrative is palimpsestic. What is palimpsestic? It aims to alter the historical and social native consciousness. Native consciousness is being altered. Native consciousness, indigenous. What is indigenous? What is tribal? What is there in the proletariat, in the peasants of a country? Those things are being obliterated or altered. What do? They delete all traces of the original and overwrite it with something considered more appropriate. Appropriate to whom? The colonizer. The colonizer rewrites everything as it suits him. And what is being rewritten? The knowledge traditions of the subaltern, the knowledge traditions of the colonized. Those things are being rewritten by the colonizer. Non-Western epistemology is dismissed as inadequate, barbaric, uncivilized, insufficiently elaborated, and naive, ignorant, senseless, stupid. Non-Western knowledge systems, epistemology is completely senseless, barbaric. Think about what happened with the sati system. The barbaric Indian versus the civilized Western, man. And that is where, she provides the typical example of sati. She provides examples of the epistemic violence through the Western intrusions into basically Hindu practices, Hindu laws, such as the right to perform sati, the widow sacrifice, the very cruel, the very inhuman practice of sati that existed in some parts of India in the 19th and early centuries. But even in the 20th century, there are very few incidents of sati being done. So now we have to remember who is Spivak. We cannot say that whatever Spivak said is sacrosanct. Whatever she said, we can just swallow without any discussion. No, Spivak describes herself as a practical deconstructionist, feminist, Marxist, and she also is not absolved from any subject position. She is using the very tools that she is undermining. She is a postmodernist feminist, and she is using the very tools of postmodernism to undermine the tenets of major postmodern theorists like Deleuze and Foucault, while at the same time we have to remember that Spivak herself is susceptible to be deconstructed using the tools that she herself uses. And if you look at the practice of sati, sati was abolished by the British in 1829. And what was this sati? We have the famous example of what happened in Tamil Nadu when a girl was liberated from the funeral pyre by a Britisher, and then she fell in love with her and he married her, and she became a nun, a sister, I'm not sure. And we have those institutions still in different parts of Tamil Nadu especially. So it was an instance of a white man saving the brown woman from the brown man. The white men saving brown women from brown men. Spivak discusses much about the sati system. However, let us be honest about it. And if we look at the Wikipedia entry on sati, you will find that lot of entries are marked. It requires further citation. It requires further elucidation. The number of satis committed in India, those numbers were reported by Christian missionaries. Those numbers were reported by the Britishers, and obviously the colonial civilizing mission of those people cannot be overlooked. So we have to understand that those numbers, and even they themselves in their reports say that these numbers are not reliable. So sati was not an issue of the subaltern. Yes, Spivak speaks about sati as an issue, as a subaltern issue, but it is not a real subaltern marginalized issue. Why? It is the issue of a very small minority population of India, and it is contested by, but it is said that sati was practiced by only a few few sections of the upper class. And of course there are contrary reports that it was practiced by some lower caste people as well. I'm not speaking caste, I'm speaking the way history is constructed. So it was the issue of a small minority in India, and minority not in the sense they were subaltern, they were not the subaltern, they were the elite class, and it never disturbed. The most important thing, we can say that the women of that elite class were marginalized, were considered subaltern. But then the thing is, this issue of sati never disturbed the inclusive fabric of the subaltern community in India, until and unless the British epistemological system felt that it is a nuisance, it is a big nonsense. No question that sati is nonsense. It is nonsense. It is nonsense. Gandhiji said it is a blot in Hinduism that Hindus themselves need to cure. And so Spivak, the postmodernist feminist, has certain things, and Spivak the postmodernist turns to the works of Foucault, Deleuze and Derrida, three major Western thinkers that Spivak turns to: Foucault, Deleuze and Derrida. She privileges Derrida over the other two. Again, there is a privileging. She's dispensing with all centers, but we can see towards the end of the essay, we can see that she is taking Derridian deconstruction to the center, and the practices of Foucault and Deleuze to the margins, kind of. She critiques Foucault and Deleuze for what? For committing epistemic violence, for projecting a white European epistemology onto the rest of the world. The West projecting a white European epistemology on the rest, especially the third world. So to sum up the essay by Gayatri Spivak, we can say that the essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, successfully politicizes Derridian deconstruction. And what does she do? She suggests, she advocates Derridian deconstruction as a technique, as a method for emancipatory readings and cultural involvements, for emancipation, for emancipating the downtrodden, for emancipating the subaltern, for emancipating whatever is whatever is in the margin. You can use Derridian deconstruction. And when she says you can do it to take something from the center, she is actually putting Derridian deconstruction to the center. And this is how we look at Spivak's essay. Now I want to take you to another perspective, another way of looking at Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? And I want to take your attention to a writer, an African writer, African black feminist philosopher, Christy Dodson. She has she has developed, she has worked on the concept of epistemic violence, and she elaborates further what epistemic violence is. I will tell you why I am saying this. I am saying this to take you to some other thing. I want to, this Christy Dodson is my step, my media, my agency to take you to something else, the herd, the unheard, the HERD herd, unheard, UNHERD, unheard, and the subaltern. So to take you there, I am taking you first to Christy Dodson, the black feminist philosopher. So in her thesis, she presents two types of ignorance, reliable ignorance and pernicious ignorance. There are two types of ignorance, reliable ignorance and pernicious ignorance. Now, what is this reliable ignorance? Reliable ignorance. Think about a child, a 3-year-old child or a 2-year-old child. A mother cannot tell the child that, see, my dear child, it is lockdown, we have to maintain social distancing, so you cannot come near me. Why? Because the child will not understand what this thing called social distancing and lockdown is. The child will not understand. So we cannot expect the child to know. This is a kind of reliable ignorance. Reliable ignorance means a kind of ignorance you can expect to be present or sometimes utilized by someone. It follows from a predictable epistemic gap. There is a vacuum, there is an absence in knowledge. This reliable ignorance proceeds from a lack or absence or a vacuum in your epistemic resources, in your cognitive resources, in your knowledge, and it need not be harmful. In certain situations it can be harmful, but the intentionality may not be there, so it need not be harmful. Reliable ignorance. That's why I talked about the 3-year-old child. There is no intention. When a child comes to his mother, even if the mother is or the child is suffering from COVID-19, the child will not understand if the mother says, please don't come near me, it is social distancing. No, the child will not understand. The child looks at the mother's lap and jumps onto the lap. It doesn't think of anything else. So this is the problem. There is a gap in knowledge, and gaps in knowledge that you can reasonably expect in any child of that age. A child is not expected to know all those things, and it need not be harmful as well. So the mere state of possessing reliable ignorance is not in itself harmful. Just because you have some reliable ignorance, it doesn't mean that you are a harmful person or your knowledge is harmful. So to identify what is harmful ignorance, certain ignorance is harmful ignorance, may be intentional, may be unintentional, but it is harmful. How do we do that? How can we know what is harmful ignorance? We can know that by only studying the context. So we need to do an analysis of the context, an analysis of power relations and other contextual factors that make the ignorance identified in that particular circumstance or set of circumstances as something harmful. Simply, this is the idea. If something is harmful, how do we know an ignorance is harmful? We have to place it in a context. We have to study it in relation to power relations and in relation to the context and everything. And then we will be able to understand, relate whether this knowledge is harmful or not. The state of reliable ignorance ensures that an epistemic agent will consistently fail to track certain truths. So whether it is intentional or unintentional, whether it is harmful or harmless, what will happen is the person who has this reliable ignorance, or the person who is suffering from reliable ignorance, he or she will consistently fail to track certain truths. And if this failure to track the truth also happens to cause harm, then Christy Dodson says, then it is no longer reliable ignorance. And ignorance, a reliable ignorance that is harmful, is known as the second type of ignorance she posits, pernicious ignorance. So, pernicious ignorance refers to any reliable ignorance that in a given context is harmful to another person. So, two types of knowledge, two types of ignorance, reliable ignorance and pernicious ignorance. Reliable ignorance, that of a child, you can just see the example, and then pernicious ignorance, that which causes harm to an ignorance that you have, which causes harm to another person. Pernicious ignorance in linguistic exchanges, in our conversations, in testimony, in linguistic exchanges, pernicious ignorance causes epistemic violence. This is the precept propounded by Christy Dodson. She says, in linguistic exchanges, what constitutes epistemic violence? Knowledge violence. What constitutes knowledge violence? Pernicious ignorance, an ignorance that is harmful to the other person. And how? Why? Not simply because of the harm one suffers as a result of this deed or as a result of this ignorance, but because, most importantly, epistemic violence institutes a practice of silencing. It institutes a practice of silencing. Somebody is silenced, and the harm done to the person is so much so that you are silenced. You are silenced. And if this pernicious ignorance is left unaddressed, if you don't do something to remedy that ignorance, whether it be your own ignorance or another person's ignorance, what will happen is epistemic violence and the resulting practices of silencing will continue. It will continue unabated. It will continue unchecked. So it is important that we check, we address this issue of pernicious ignorance. This is what Christy Dodson, K-R-I-S-T-I-E, Christy, D-O-T-S-O-N, Christy Dodson, in her essay, she says, in the title of the essay is Tracking Epistemic Violence, Tracking Practices of Silencing. This is the title of the essay. So, pernicious ignorance and reliable ignorance. And what is epistemic violence? Dodson sees epistemic violence as a type of pernicious ignorance that occurs when dominant hearers in linguistic communication, right, in linguistic exchange, when dominant hearers, somebody is speaking and you being a person of the dominant class, the elite class, you are trying to hear. So, when dominant hearers refuse to meet marginal speakers halfway or on their own, or some compromised epistemic turf between them. What is she saying? She says that for a fruitful communication to happen between the elite and the marginalized, between the subaltern and the dominant, what we require is for the dominant class to meet the linguistic exchange made by the subaltern on a common ground. There should be some implicit understanding, there should be some halfway or some reduction should be made, to understand their speech. This is why Dodson says, to communicate we all need an audience who is willing and capable of hearing us. First, the audience should be capable of hearing us. They should have the system of hearing. And secondly, they should be willing to hear us. If only both these things happen, will there be successful communication between the subaltern and the elite. So, they should be willing and capable of hearing the subaltern. And the extent to which entire populations of people can be denied this kind of linguistic reciprocation, as a matter of course institutes epistemic violence. Whole groups of people, whole societies are denied hearing because there is no common ground. There is no when we study aesthetics, we say, when we study communication, we say that to understand the meaning of something that somebody says, there should be some sort of generosity on the part of the listener, right? We can't always blame the speaker if something is not communicated properly. Sometimes the blame falls on the listener as well. And there is a little bit of generosity required on the part of the listener to understand what the speaker says. What is this generosity? And I will give a classical example from Indian Sanskrit poetry. The great Indian poet, Sanskrit poet, says he is describing something, and he is describing a hamlet, a village, and he says Gangayam Kosham. Gangayam Kosham. It means the village is on the Ganges. Ganges, the river Ganga. The village, the hamlet is on the river, is on Ganga. Okay, this is what he says. Now, the listener hears to this and he processes it. The hut or the village is on the Ganges. Now, common sense tells us that it is senseless, because a hut or a village or a hamlet cannot be on the Ganges, in the river. It cannot be in the river. So what will we assume? Common sense tells us that from the context we have to imagine that the hut is not on the Ganges, but the hut is on the bank of the river Ganges. The poet is using some poetic license, and I'm not going into the details. Actually, his purpose is to suggest something, Vyanjana, to bring the power of Vyanjana into effect. He is using this example, Gangayam Kosham, but I'm not going into the details. Just the idea, we need some sort of common ground, some sort of generosity to understand. When that generosity is absent on the part of the dominant elite, what will happen? Whatever, even if the subaltern speaks, nobody will be there to listen, or nobody will pay heed to what they say. And that she characterizes it as a reliable ignorance that does harm, specifically through the alleged power dynamics between groups in the institution. Now, this is what happens, and Dodson's claim is that dominant groups reliably and almost maliciously, malignantly, with an evil intention to cause harm, ignore the voice of the members of the marginalized because they do not value them as knowers. First thing, I don't care, I don't think that you are a knowledgeable person, I don't consider you as a knowledgeable person, and secondly, I do not want to value you as a knowledgeable person. There is a difference, right? I do not value you as a knowledgeable person, and secondly, I do not want to value you as a knowledgeable person. Because of these two reasons, there is pernicious ignorance on the part of the listener. Because what will happen when the person belonging to the ruling elite dominant class, when a dominant person admits different or excluded or marginalized knowledge, what would happen is it would necessarily upset the existing power dynamics that have benefited the dominant groups. So there is a fear. I don't want the status quo to be changed. Now everything is fine for me. Now everything is good for me. I am in the dominant position. So I am afraid, in a sense, I am afraid that if I listen to his voice, if I give voice to him, if I give voice to the marginalized and the oppressed and the subaltern, the power configurations may change and I may not have the benefits that I have now. This is the fear. This is the fear that makes these people, the elite, suffer from this illness called pernicious ignorance. And according to Dodson's formulation, epistemic violence can occur without any intention to do violence. Even if there is no intention to do violence, so long as pernicious violence results in some sort of harm being done to a marginalized group, especially in terms of their status as knowers. You no longer give them the status as knowers, as knowledgeable people, and then even if there is no intentionality on your part to do violence, you are unwittingly committing violence, epistemic violence on the subordinate subaltern group. Thus, epistemic violence, I am quoting Dodson, epistemic violence is a refusal, intentional or unintentional, of an audience to communicatively reciprocate a linguistic exchange owing to pernicious ignorance. Epistemic violence is enacted in a failed linguistic exchange where a speaker fails to communicatively reciprocate owing to pernicious ignorance. Now keep this in mind. Pernicious ignorance. What is pernicious ignorance? Why pernicious ignorance? Why they don't want to hear? What is the knower? What is the problem with the knower? Is it the problem with the speaker or the listener? Think about these things. Now, Spivak uses the term epistemic. I'm going away from Christy Dodson. Spivak uses the term epistemic violence as a way of marking the silencing of marginalized groups. We know that. For Spivak, these are the terms that she uses: general, non-specialists, the illiterate peasantry, the tribals, and the lower strata of the urban sub-proletariat are populations that are routinely silenced or subjected to epistemic violence. And epistemic, and then she speaks about the epistemic dimension of colonialism when she says when she speaks about the devastating effect of the disappearance of large chunks of knowledge. What knowledge? Indigenous knowledge gets vanished. It vanishes into thin air. Indigenous knowledge, the knowledge of the common man, the knowledge of the masses, the knowledge of the traditional tribal army common citizen, that knowledge is disappearing. Where local or provincial knowledge is dismissed due to privileging alternative and often Western epistemic practices. And Spivak's account of subaltern classes has come under a lot of fire, has come under a lot of criticism from different quarters. But what Spivak has done is something unprecedented in the history of of the underprivileged, because her insight into the difficulties of addressing a type of violence that attempts to eliminate knowledge possessed by marginal subjects is still useful today. That practice, that insight is very relevant, because it is because of Spivak's work and the work of other philosophers who followed after her, the reality that members of the oppressed groups can be silenced by virtue of group membership is widely acknowledged. What is it? Members of oppressed groups can be silenced by virtue of group membership by the dominant. This is widely acknowledged because of what Spivak said. Now remember this part of the statement: silenced by virtue of group membership. Just because you belong to a group, you have a membership to a group, not a membership certificate or anything, but just because you are a member, you belong to a group. So silenced by virtue of group membership. Keep this in your mind as we proceed into the second section of our lecture. Here I want to take you to the term the herd, H-E-R-D, herd. You know what a herd is: a herd of cattle, a herd of sheep. We speak about the herd. Now, who is the herd? Who is the herd? I will say, it is my proposition that the herd is the dominant group, the elite group, who suffer from the fear of losing their dominance. I told you there is a fear. Why they don't want to listen to the subalterns? Because they fear that they will lose the power configuration that has given them all the power. So there is fear. in the dominant group, in the elite, which makes them, that fear makes them refuse this position of knower to the subaltern. Now, I am saying that it is the dominant group who is the herd. How? I want to quote a statement by Bertrand Russell, the famous philosopher. In his unpopular essays, Bertrand Russell says this: collective fear stimulates herd instinct. Collective fear stimulates herd instinct and tends to produce ferocity toward those who are not regarded as members of the herd. Collective fear, fear of a group, it stimulates herd instinct, and what is the result? Because of herd instinct, it produces ferocity, violence towards those who are not regarded as members of the herd. I told you to remember one thing: silenced by virtue of their membership. That was about the subaltern. Now I am speaking about the dominant group, and I am speaking about them in terms of fear, in terms of being silenced in a way because of their group membership. You can understand that I am trying to do a deconstruction, a deconstructive reading, where I am trying to show that the subaltern is sometimes the center, the center cannot hold. The subaltern is not always the center, or the elite is not always the center. There is something else. Collective fear. Now, what is this herd instinct or herd behavior that Bertrand Russell speaks about? It is another concept in social science, or I don't know if it is psychology. So, herd instinct is a mentality that is distinguished by a lack of individual decision making or introspection, causing people to think and behave in a similar fashion to those around them. I do what others do in my, when I am in a group, without any reason, without any rational cause, I do what people around me do. This is the only thing. I don't have any other reason. What others do, I just follow. This is the herd instinct. This is the herd, H-E-R-D, herd. Don't confuse it with H-E-A-R-D, herd. This is H-E-R-D, herd. Herd instinct, following the group. For example, a person comes to a street, a deserted street, because it is locked down, and two shops are open. Two restaurants are open. He wants to have something for his lunch. He is feeling hungry. So he sees two shops, and both the shops are empty. Both the shops are open, but both the shops are empty. Nobody is sitting there. Nobody is having food there. Yeah, the delivery boy is there, or the cashier. They are there. The hotel staff is there, but no customers are there. So hotel A and hotel B. He decides to go to hotel B. No reason. Simply he felt that, okay, both the hotels are same. So I will just go to hotel B. Okay, his choice is random. Now, after a few minutes, a couple come that way, and they look around, and they see that there are two hotels, A and B. A doesn't have a single person sitting inside it having food, but B has a person who is sitting inside it and having food. So naturally, most likely, this couple will go to that hotel. I am not saying this is herd instinct pakka, because there is a reason also. There is a reason why we go to that hotel, because we think that, oh, nobody goes to that hotel, probably there is no food, or probably the food there is not good. This person may be a native, so he knows this hotel, and that is why he has gone to that hotel, and so we will also go there. So 3 people are in that hotel, and that day what will happen? That hotel is going to gross a huge collection, and this hotel is going to collect nothing, very little. Why? Because of the herd instinct. People will go where other people are. This is the herd instinct in very simple terms. So herd behavior in humans is frequently observed. This is just a normal example that I gave, but frequently we observe this herd behavior in human beings when they are in danger or when they are in panic. For example, suppose there is a fire in a building. There is a fire in a building. A stampede happens. People rush out. people will often suspend their individual reasoning. They will not think which is the right exit. They will go where all the others are going. Everybody will flee in a pack, causing a stampede. So many people will die on the staircase itself, stepped on, trampled on by others. So this is an instance of herd behavior. Now I want to take you to a story of a girl. You know, in a mathematics class, the teacher is asking a question, and he asks a girl to stand up, and he asks this question. Okay, tell me this: there are 50 sheep in your shed. 50 sheep safe at your shed at night, and 2 sheep get out of the shed at night. Now how many sheep will be left in that? When you go in the morning to the cattle shed, how many sheep will be left in your cattle shed? That is the question. The girl says 0. No sheep will be left in the cattle shed. Now the mathematics teacher is very upset. He asks again the same question. 50 sheep, only 2 jumped out of the cattle shed. How many will be there? She says 0. Now the mathematics teacher's answer is 48 and the girl's answer is 0. Why? There is something called native wisdom, and this native wisdom tells the girl that if 2 sheep get out of the cattle shed, everyone will follow. Everyone will follow. So her wisdom, her native wisdom tells her that there will be 0 sheep left in the cattle shed. This is the sheep story. The rural girl and the mathematics professor. A very famous story. Many of you might have heard about it. Now, I am trying to do a deconstructive reading where the dominant turns into the subaltern and vice versa. I told you. And I am going to introduce another term to you. Sheeple. Sheeple, S-H-E-E-P-L-E. Sheeple is a portmanteau word combining sheep and people. It is a derogatory term that highlights the passive herd behavior of people easily controlled, which likens them to sheep, a herd animal that is easily led about. And the term is used to describe people who voluntarily agree to a suggestion without any critical analysis, without any research, in large part due to the majority of the population having a similar interest, a similar motive. Now, the definition says, what is sheeple? S-H-E-E-P-L-E, sheep plus people, sheep people. What is this sheep? Sheeple. Sheeple are people who are meek, easily persuaded, and tend to follow the crowd. Sheeple. People who are docile, compliant, or easily influenced, people likened to sheep. A group of animals fleeing from a predator. Take the example of a group of animals. They are escaping from the predator. It shows the nature of herd behavior. In 1971, in a famous article titled Geometry for the Selfish Herd, but the famous biologist W.D. Hamilton asserted that each individual member in a group reduces the danger to itself when it is fleeing, when it is escaping from its predator, by moving as close as possible to the center of the group. What will they do? To avoid maximum danger to me, to make sure that I don't have much danger, each animal will move closer to the center, as closer as possible to the center. And remember, the center cannot hold. The center cannot hold. The cattle, the herd, what do? They move closer to the center, hoping that very little danger will be there. Thus, the herd appears as a unit. It looks like they are a group, but what is the reality? Is it that they are a group, that they are moving together? No. But what is the reason why they move together? Its function emerges from the uncoordinated behavior of selfish individuals. Each animal in this herd is selfish, and that is why it is moving closer and closer to the center, because it believes that when it is closer to the center, it is safe. This is how something becomes a group. The center, moving closer to the center. In philosophy, Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche were among the first to criticize the herd behavior, and Kierkegaard spoke about the crowd behavior and the herd morality, and Nietzsche spoke about herd instinct in human society. For those who want to know more about it, you can read these things. Soren Kierkegaard and Nietzsche spoke about the same mentality. Social scientists, psychologists, for example, Sigmund Freud spoke about crowd psychology. Carl Jung spoke about collective unconscious. Dean Martin spoke about the behavior of crowds. Gustave Le Bon, he spoke about the popular mind. What is it? Moving closer to the center. Epistemic violence is practiced by the elite who actually exhibit subaltern tendencies. What is the subaltern tendency? I gave you the definitions of what sheeple are. What are they? Meek, easily persuaded, tending to follow the crowd, docile, compliant, easily influenced. Now, who is behaving like the sheeple here? Epistemic violence is practiced by the elite who exhibit actually the subaltern tendencies. I will give you an example, a quote actually. Isaac Asimov, the famous writer, he says, violence is the last resort or the last refuge of the incompetent, not the competent. Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent, the docile, the sheeple. Violence is the last resort of the incompetent, says Isaac Asimov. And E.F. Schumacher, he says something even more interesting. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex and more violent. Any person who has some intelligence can make a thing violent. It takes a touch of genius and lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. To go against violence, it requires genius. Now, who is the center and who is the margin? Is it the subaltern or is it the elite class? Think. Now, I will take you to the, I cannot take a lot of time, that's why I am moving forward. I will take you to the next term, the unheard. Here, I will be giving a different meaning to unheard, and there is no word as unheard. It is, my word is UNHERD. I have used it as the opposite of heard. HERD, heard, its opposite will be unheard. That is the idea. I mean, if there is no such word actually. So, I am going to tell you about a situation when silence means indifference. Silence becomes indifference. Karl Marx has said a lot of things about our country, and not always very beautiful things. Karl Marx says this about India: a fossil form of stagnant society incapable of social change. A fossil form of stagnant society incapable of social change. What is happening, my dear friends? Think of the poem by Robert Frost, Fire and Ice. He is thinking, what will cause the end of the world? Will it be caused by fire, hatred, or by ice, indifference? And he says, he concludes the poem saying that I think I know enough of hate to know that it will suffice. It will be hatred or indifference that will cause the end of the world. That is what Robert Frost says. Yehuda Boer, he says, thou shalt not be a victim. You should not be a victim. Always make sure you are not a victim. Thou shalt not be a perpetrator, but above all, thou shalt not be a bystander. That is the worst thing. Being indifferent is the worst thing. And I will come to the next quotation, another quotation. I am taking you to these quotations because it is in these adages, in these famous sayings that we always believe. So, Martin Luther King Jr. in A Testament of Hope, he says, it may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people, Not for the bad things committed by bad people, no. But what should we be repentant about? But for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Indifference, appalling silence and indifference of the people who sit around and say, wait on time. That is what we are going to be repentant about, and that is exactly what William Butler Yeats said in the Second Coming. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dim tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Now there are minor lessons for us, major lessons for us in these things as well. I will take you to an example actually. Think about Subramanya Bharati, the great Bharati, the great Mahakavi Bharati of Tamilians, Subramanya Bharati. And I am bringing his example to show you how the center could not hold, center cannot hold. The center failed to hold him when he was in danger. You know, Subramanya Bharati was a great Tamil writer, a great poet, a great freedom fighter, a great social reformer. You know, he was a person who spoke for the voiceless, somebody who spoke for the subaltern, we can say that. He is considered one of the greatest Tamil literary figures, but more importantly, his patriotic songs kindled a lot of patriotic spirit during the independence movement. He fought for women's emancipation, he was against child marriage, he was in solidarity with Dalits and the Muslims. So a true representative, a true spokesperson of the subaltern was this person, Subramanya Bharati. Now, I am taking a small anecdote from his life. In 1908, an arrest warrant was issued by the British government against Subramanya Bharati. And what he did was, he escaped to Pondicherry in 1908. And what happened was, why Pondicherry? Because Pondicherry was under French rule then, the boundaries, the borders. Tamil Nadu was under British rule, Pondicherry was under French rule. So he escaped to Pondicherry. And when he reached Pondicherry, you know what? It was from Pondicherry that this Subramanya Bharati, the great poet, wrote his masterpieces that stirred the center. Tamil Nadu is the center, Pondicherry is the margin, geographically. So it was the margin that stirred the center. It was from the margin that Subramanya Bharati stirred the center into Independence Day revolts. He brought out journals, he brought out bi-monthly magazines, Vijaya, Balabharatam, Suryodayam. So lot of weeklies and things were brought out. The British tried to suppress those things, but they could not. Subramanya Bharati continued to write from Pondicherry and rekindle the flames dying in the people of India from Pondicherry, from the margins. The center could not save him from danger, but the margin saved him from danger, and he fanned the flames of freedom struggle. So, and a small sad story as well, an aside. The Subramanya Bharati is considered a people's poet, a great freedom fighter and a social visionary. But when he died, he returned to Tamil Nadu. When he died, there were only 14 people to attend his funeral. Maybe it is a poetic justice that there were only 14, a sonnet, 14 people to attend his funeral. But we know, we have great respect for Subramanya Bharati. The Bharatiyar University was instituted in his name in Coimbatore. So Subramanya Bharati, think of the example. Now, this is the unheard. I was speaking about the unheard. Now, finally, I was talking about how the center cannot hold. Finally, I am taking you to the term, the subaltern. The last piece in our discussion, our paper was titled, Understanding Epistemic Violence, the Herd the unheard, and the subaltern. So finally, I am taking you to the term subaltern. Who are the subalterns? I will take you to another example as to why we need subaltern histories, subaltern writings. Take the case of Vaikam Satyagraha. Vaikam is a place in Kerala in the Kottayam district, and it is a place where a famous Satyagraha took place in the 1920s, known as the Vaikam Satyagraha, and it concerned itself with the temple entry, and people from lower castes were not allowed entry into the temples. So this was the Vaikam Satyagraha, and Mahatma Gandhi is considered to be the hero of Vaikam Satyagraha mostly. Now I want to take you to certain issues within this history. You know who is known as Periyar in Tamil Nadu? They call it Tanda Periyar, Periyar or Tanda Periyar. E.V. Ramaswamy, the famous politician, activist, social activist, a spokesperson for the subalterns. E.V. Ramaswamy, Tanda Periyar. So Ramaswamy, you know what? His followers and so many sections of people in South India believe that E.V. Ramaswamy is the real hero of Vaikam Satyagraha, and I request all of you to go to the Wikipedia page on Vaikam Satyagraha, and there you will find a section on E.V. Ramaswamy's contribution to Vaikam Satyagraha, and as the heading they have written, this discussion is disputed. It lacks proper citation. Why? There is an alternate history that is gradually being written. So many people, in the north and in the south, there are two versions of Vaikam Satyagraha, or two versions of who exactly was the hero of Vaikam Satyagraha. E.V. Ramaswamy joined the rebellion against the upper classes, against the elite Brahmins, because the elites were only granted permission to enter the temples. The lower classes, the Shudras, the Vaishyas, they were not even allowed to use the roads leading to the temples. So there was a rebellion, there was a satyagraha, and E.V. Ramaswamy joined. He joined the Congress in the Indian National Congress in 1919, and he resigned from the Indian National Congress in 1925 because he felt the Indian National Congress was appeasing the Brahmins. Whatever it be, I mean, I'm not siding or anything, I'm just giving you two perspectives, how things are looked at. So, works on Vaikam Satyagraha based on North Indian and South Indian sources depict two different pictures. The North Indian picture says Mahatma Gandhi interfered, he withdrew the Vaikam Satyagraha for a brief while, and he interfered, and it was through his intervention that Vaikam Satyagraha succeeded, and the subalterns gained entry into the temple, and lot of things. Now the South Indian version is that E.V. Ramaswamy is the real hero of Vaikam Satyagraha, and he is known as Vaikam Veeran. Tamilians would know this. E.V. Ramaswamy, Tanda Periyar, is known as Vaikam Veeran because of his active involvement in the Vaikam Satyagraha. But one thing, Congress mouthpiece, there was a weekly or a newspaper like thing called Young India, and in that publication there is not a single mention of E.V. Ramaswamy in its extensive reports on Vaikam Satyagraha. But there are historical evidences to prove that he was a part of it. He was arrested, his wife was arrested, they both came here to Vaikam, and they participated. All these things are there. But who wrote history that time? The Congress mouthpiece wrote history, and it said Mahatma Gandhi. It is Mahatma Gandhi who led Vaikam Satyagraha to its success. Now, an attempt to impose the mainstream ideology of the time Tamil society was regarded by Periyar as an invasion on Tamil culture. He didn't like it, and Gandhiji and Periyar were on two different, on two pages, were on different pages. So on so many things, I'm not going into that. But what I am saying is, history written from the subaltern angle alone can rectify or give more clarity to what exactly happened. The subaltern angle is still disputed. There is no question mark over Gandhiji's role in Vaikam Satyagraha, but there is a big question mark everywhere on E.V. Ramaswamy's role in Vaikam Satyagraha. Why isn't there such a discourse? Why isn't the subaltern angle not adequately represented? Now, what is this subaltern angle? It was in 1980s that Ranajit Guha and his disciples, it was under the stewardship of Ranajit Guha that the subaltern studies movement started in India in the 1980s. Partha Chatterjee, Deepesh Chakravarti, Spivak, all these people were part of this subaltern studies movement, and they examine larger issues and institutions from above, from top to bottom only. Even Spivak, they examine things from top to bottom only. They fail to deal with microcosmic social issues. They did a lot of things, no question about that. They did a yeoman service to the subaltern representation in our country especially, but we can see, when we look at it closely, we can find that it was looking at things from top to bottom, and we wanted a bottom to top approach. That was missing in their discourse. They failed to deal with minor issues, the substrata, what is happening in the substrata. They failed to come much below to examine the root of social issues. They dealt only with certain larger institutions, and this is why we need to have a better perspective, and a corrective to this problem was provided by the book Untouchable Freedom, a social history of a Dalit community by Vijay Prashad. He wrote, it is a wonderful book of anybody who is studying subaltern studies, subaltern history, subaltern historiography should go to this particular book. It is awesome. It speaks about manual scavengers, the sanitation workers, the Balmikis of Delhi, and it rectifies the top to bottom approach of the people belonging to the subaltern studies movement, and interventions by three intellectuals. Think about it. Three intellectuals from the third world countries who were teaching in the West, who were working and who were doing things in the West. Three intellectuals. Who were the three? One, of course, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak with her contribution on subaltern. Second, Edward Said with his concept of Orientalism, and finally Homi Bhabha with his concept of hybridity. These three third world intellectuals did a lot of interventions to make sure that above the Eurocentric voice, the subaltern voice is heard. However, even they chose only canonical texts. That is the problem. There is a problem. They chose only canonical texts as representatives of subaltern literature. Spivak introduced only Bhabani Bhattacharya and R.K. Narayan. No subaltern writers were introduced. And earlier Professor Hossain was telling us about Untouchables. The Untouchable by Mulkraj Anand. When you closely look at the story of Untouchable Baka, you realize that it is, yes, it is, we can, of course, there is no question that it was a great work, and it was probably the first work that gave a proper voice to the subalterns. But did it actually give a voice to the subalterns? No. Why? Because Mulkraj Anand wrote it as Mulkraj Anand, not as a subaltern. It doesn't give voice to the subaltern themselves, but it gives a narrative of a subaltern from an elitist point of view. And that is why we find that this Baka, this hero, the Untouchable, he does things which are, he plays hockey. no untouchable in those days would play hockey, and he becomes a Gandhian at the end of the story. Those things, and you know, it is said that Mahatma Gandhi laughed at the draft when Anand showed this draft to Mahatma Gandhi, and Mahatma Gandhi said, "See, what have you written? You write like a Western scholar. Your Baka, your untouchable is like a Western intellectual. That shouldn't be the case." And then he rewrote the entire story. This is an anecdote. So there are problems with all these things, and they failed largely to look from below. And the corrective to this was also provided by E.P. Thompson's famous 1966 essay titled History from Below, from the all famous Times Literary Supplement. History from Below, which brought the phrase from below, history from below, to the forefront of historiography. Again, subaltern historiographers study this book, study this essay, History from Below by E.P. Thompson. Subaltern historiography began, and it emphasized the role of the disenfranchised, the subalterns, the real subalterns. A common man's history began to be written, and this shift in perspective was not an isolated shift. It happened in all major spheres across time. When you look at the Romantic movement, you can find, you know, that famous poet saying, "Heard melodies are sweet, those unheard are sweeter." Unheard melodies are sweeter. Romanticism. Voices that have been systematically excluded, the marginalized. We have heard that sentence from a different angle, right? But think about it. Unheard melodies are sweeter. Which are the unheard melodies? The voices of the marginalized, which are silenced. Unheard melodies are sweeter. So there was this movement towards unheard melodies. Think about science, about physics, particle physics. Science moved from atom to the subatomic particles, the neutrons, positrons, all those things. Subatomic, psychology moved from the conscious mind to the subconscious mind. I think, therefore I am became, you are when or where you do not think. I can understand you only when you do not think, according to Freud, Deleuze, Lacan, Guattari. All these people said, I can understand you only when you do not speak, you do not think. Think of the huge shift that happened. I think, therefore I am, to you are when you do not think. That is when I can understand you. So this shift to the subconscious. New historicism again, sub-histories. New historicism spoke about sub-histories. They said there is no history at all, only histories. There are histories, his stories, sub-histories, subaltern histories. Official records are not important. Authentic histories are not important. That is why Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children is so important as a post-colonial text. What happened? Salim Sinai, he says his birth subordinates the birth of a country. The history of a nation is subordinated to the birth of a person called Salim Sinai on the stroke of 12 midnight on 15th of August 1947. So a sub-history is brought to the center, and the real history, within double quotes, the real history of a country is marginalized. The story, and he says, I am handcuffed to history. I am handcuffed to history. Which history? The history written by the Western colonialist. I am handcuffed to that history, and I am trying to break free from that colonial history. The story of Salim Sinai subordinated the history of the country. This is how New Historicism, spoke about history, sub-history. So think about it: conscious to the subconscious, atom to the subatomic particles, from history to sub-histories, from the elite to the subaltern. The shift is real, and the shift is really happening. The subaltern is the collective name given to those considered to be at the lowest level of the social hierarchy. They consist of illiterate peasantry, the subproletariat, the tribal communities, all restricted linguistically, linguistic exclusivity. And that is why Spivak questioned whether the true subaltern groups are able to speak for themselves, self-represent themselves. Why? Because they are objectified. And Spivak says no, right? The Spivak, the question she asks is, can the subaltern speak? And she says no. The subaltern cannot speak. So will representing the subaltern by others do? No. We need to give voice to the subalterns, right? But unfortunately, when we look around, we can find that the truly subaltern has no voice wherever he is. Whether it is the Shavs of Britain, the Dalits of India, the black and Hispanic communities of the United States, they all suffer the same oppression and maltreatment. And only after some apparent inhuman treatment of rape or murder or genocide, we, the so-called educated class, show shock and horror, and Facebook posts, a lot of things will happen, and suddenly it is in the mainstream news, and then gradually things will go back to the status quo. Now, will something like what Frantz Fanon called a violent decolonialization happen? Will a rejig, a reorganization happen? Think about what John F. Kennedy said. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. If you make peaceful revolution impossible, you will have to suffer from violent revolution. It will become inevitable. So I think, oh my God, I am running short of time. Okay, thanks for reminding. So I am concluding. I wanted to give you the example of superstar Rajnikant, how he moved from a macho anti-hero to the an anti-hero version of he represented the black, and it is very much very good that we can refer the last movie 2019 Kala, so it is the black one, the black, where he represents the subaltern character. That history of Rajnikant is very interesting, how he, in Shivaji the Boss, he even bleached himself white to be with dark skin, white-skinned heroines from the north. But later there was a shift. Tamil cinema is witnessing that shift. So you can go to that as well, how Rajnikant, the cult of Rajnikant has changed from an anti-hero to a mass culture-based hero to finally coming to representing a subaltern hero. I don't know whether it was a success or not. So anyway, I'm concluding with a statement by Frantz Fanon. There comes a time when silence becomes dishonesty. There comes a time when silence becomes dishonesty. Writers normally make the silent speak. They give voice to the silent. Good writers make silence itself speak. Good writers make the silent and the silence speak. Think about, I told you about R.K. Narayan and Mulkraj Anand. I want to remind you of some other writers as well. Karku Bama, Sharan Kumar Limbale. What do you find in them? The real subaltern condition. They make silence and the silent speak. They speak. They are the silence, and they speak about the silence. They speak about the silent. What we need is to unravel this silence. Make the silent speak. Make the silence speak. Why? Because great art is artless. Matthew Arnold in reference to Leo Tolstoy, in his essay Anna Karenina, I think in 1879, he said Tolstoy's stories, there is no art in Tolstoy's stories, but what is there? There is life. You would only find, Arnold said about Tolstoy, this is not art, this is life. And that is the greatest testimony, testament to the greatness of an artist. Antony, Brutus is an honorable man. He did not speak. He made the wounds of Shakespeare speak. Isn't it great? It was a common metaphor in medieval literature to compare gaping wounds to mouths. Wounds were considered to be mouths in medieval metaphor. And in this case, the mouths are dumb because they cannot speak, because it is of the dead man. And he says, Mark Antony bids the wounds to speak. And he says, put a tongue in every wound of Shakespeare that should move the stones of Rome to rise and mutiny. To rise and mutiny. Every wound of Caesar. And concluding with one final quote from another Shakespeare hero, Hamlet. Hamlet. He tells Horatio, "Oh God, Horatio, what a wounded name! Things standing thus unknown shall leave behind me." He's dying. "If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity awhile, and in this harsh world draw thy breaths in pain, to tell my story, to tell my story." And he says, he bids goodbye to the world with this parting statement, "The rest is silence. The rest is silence." What is the rest? The third world. Silenced by the West. The rest silenced by the West. The rest is silence. Even Hamlet, we never thought of it like that, did we? Even Hamlet said, the rest is silence, and our duty is to not just give voice to the silenced, but make them speak, enable them speak. We need a community where everything is transparent, where everyone can speak and everyone can be heard. And that is the biggest advantage of social media. Everyone can speak, everyone can be heard. You don't have to wait to be published. You can publish it immediately as you write. So with this, I conclude my session. I hope I have made some connections and I have clarified certain things regarding subaltern literature. So with this, I wind up. Thank you for your very kind and patient listening. And once again, thanks to the organizers for giving me this sweet opportunity to speak to this wonderful gathering. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful and energetic speech. Now the session is open for interaction.
Sir, we are really happy to have a nice day with you. Really, we enjoyed a lot from your words, as well as we could feel the taste of literature from your way of expressions. Really, we enjoyed your expressions very well. That's like watching a Hollywood movie. We enjoyed a lot. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now there are a lot of questions from the audience side, sir.
Yeah.
I will read out it one by one. The first question is, sir, can epistemic violence be equated with testimonial silencing?
Yeah, it is. It is. Epistemic violence is testimonial silencing. Actually, when I was speaking about Christy Dodson, it was about testimonial silencing. Testimony, whatever happens in a linguistic exchange. So, testimony, think about testimony as somebody who is speaking, someone speaking, and testimonial silencing is the result. I would say like this: epistemic violence causes testimonial silence. This is what happens. Because of epistemic violence committed by the elite and the powerful and the dominant, what happens is the subaltern is silenced. The testimony of the subaltern is silenced. So, testimonial silence is a result of epistemic violence. It cannot be equated. It is there is a cause and effect relationship. This is what I think. There is a cause and effect relationship. The question was, can it be equated, right? No, it cannot be equated as such. It is like a karya-karana relationship, cause and effect relationship. There is an objective correlative. if the produced is silence, if to produce silence, there should be an objective correlative. For testimonic silence to be produced, there should be an objective correlative, and that objective correlative is epistemic violence. I think you have got the idea. That was why this question came up. Very good question. The connection between epistemic violence and testimonial silence. Very good question. Very good.
So thank you, sir. Thank you for your explanation, sir. I hope that the audience will be clear with their doubt. The next question is that, can pernicious ignorance be harmful?
Pernicious ignorance in itself is harmful, right? The term itself, pernicious, dangerous, causing harm. Pernicious ignorance is definitely harmful. In all situations, pernicious ignorance is harmful, but the other ignorance, reliable ignorance, it need not be harmful at all times. Pernicious ignorance in itself is harmful at all times because its purpose is to cause injury, to cause harm. Whoever be the object, the purpose of the subject is to cause harm. So pernicious ignorance is always harmful, but reliable ignorance need not be harmful at times, because ignorance, we don't know so many things. Sometimes it can create problems for us also, sometimes it can create problems for others, but it need not always create problems. I gave the example of the 3-year-old child. Such ignorance we cannot blame, and there is I think it is Milne who said, where ignorance is bliss, it is folly to be wise. So there is such a perspective as well. When ignorance is good, it is better to be ignorant, because if you know more, it will be tragic. That is what happened to Oedipus. Remember what happened to Oedipus? He wanted to know more. He wasn't happy with ignorance, and his search for truth, his quest after knowledge is what leads to his ultimate downfall. We call it hubris, but ultimately we know that the hamartia, the tragic flaw in Oedipus, was basically his questioning nature, his interest in seeking knowledge, something that we praise in Ulysses, in Tennyson's poem Ulysses. He wants to seek, to find, to strive, to seek, to find, and never to yield. We praise that, but when Oedipus does that, we call it hubris. So there are different ways of looking at it, but pernicious ignorance is, the term, by what the term means, it is dangerous, it is harmful. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Another one question, sir. Why does Spivak says that members of an ethnic group are not necessarily subalterns?
Could you please repeat? Who said what?
Why does Spivak says that members of an ethnic group are not necessarily subalterns?
Well, it depends, right? It depends. We cannot say that somebody is a subaltern just because somebody belongs to that particular group. Because it depends on the context, it depends on the situation. Even within situation, even within groups, there are subgroups. For example, when a peasant is revolting, maybe he is revolting against the government. Maybe he is revolting against the system, the bigger system, the ultimate enemy, the system. Maybe he is revolting against that. But there is an immediate enemy as well for the peasant. Who is the immediate enemy for the peasant or the proletariat? Who is the immediate enemy? The zemindar, the landlord, the person, the money maker who lends money for huge interest. The money lenders, those people, they are their immediate enemies. So can we call them subalterns? In a sense, they belong to a subaltern group. But are they subalterns? The money lender in a peasant community, he is a subaltern in a particular sense, but he is not a subaltern because he has some voice. We know what happened in British India. There were many Indians. Just because somebody is an Indian, it doesn't mean that all Indians were subalterns, right? There were many Indians who who took part in the British ruling system, the Britishers gave prominent positions to Indians. So can we say the Indians that the Indians were all subalterns? No. Just because we say that there is this colonizer and colonized divide, sometimes the colonized may go into the position of the colonizer as well, and that is why this violent decolonization was required in Africa. Franz Fanon says why it was required, because there were problems within the groups. There were problems within the groups, and it is these people with vested interests within groups that create a lot of other problems within the group problems. For example, during Indian freedom struggle, the peasant revolts were there. The peasants were, the real peasants, the real proletariat, the real subalterns were there. On the one hand, the high class used them to show their strength, and on the other hand, they suppressed their interests as well. So all these things happen. So we cannot say just because somebody belongs to a particular group or something, a group membership, that cannot always guarantee that they are subaltern. Yeah. Yes.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. One more last question, sir.
Okay.
Do disabled people come under subalternity?
Definitely, that is a very important topic today, and it is a very relevant area as well. The disabled, it is very important to celebrate differences. We say it is important to celebrate differences, that is why we call them the differently abled and all. But definitely the disabled come under subalterns, because they don't get proper representation, they don't get proper voice. The thing is, the yardstick to decide should be this: are they getting proper representation? Are they able to voice their concerns? Are they being heard? If they are heard, and if they are properly represented, and if they are getting recognition, then we can say that no, they are no longer subalterns. They have risen from the ashes of their subaltern position into the, we cannot call them elite, but into the common people. We want everyone to be common people, right? We don't want this class distinction, the base structure and superstructure, the class struggle that Marxism speaks about. Maybe if we can dispense with that sort of a thinking, what Derrida said, we need to dispense with the idea of the center and the margins. He never said that by removing the center we should put something else at the center. That is not what Derrida meant. Similarly here too, that is a situation. We cannot do that, because a reservation, for example, that is a very burning question. Should reservations be there? Should certain categories be given reservation? The disabled are given reservations. In certain situations that is very much necessary. In certain situations we find that it is being exploited by some people as well. So it can only be understood based on the particular context in which certain things happen. And we cannot brand somebody as subaltern. We cannot brand somebody as elite. Maybe the same person can be elite and subaltern at the same time. That maybe the same person can be the center and the margin at the same time. So as Derrida said, what we need to do is to do away with this kind of thinking. We have to avoid thinking about things in terms of these binary oppositions. We want things to coexist. A harmonious coexistence is what we require. So but it is a very relevant thing, disabilities, and that is why there are a lot of disability studies happening. And disability studies, I guess, is always combined with subaltern studies as well, because of this inherent connection between the subalterns and the disabled. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. One more question from our first year student.
Yeah.
He has wrote a question that, sir, does prejudice and stereotypes about the subalterns worsens their situation further.
Definitely, it is prejudice, and what was the other term?
Stereotypes.
Yeah, stereotyping, prejudice. All these things contribute a lot to worsen the situation of the subaltern. No doubt about that. We ourselves make this mistake. We cannot say they are the elite who are oppressing this subaltern. No, it is we. We all are doing this. We knowingly or unknowingly, we all are doing this because of our prejudice, because of our we stereotype certain people. We cannot do certain things that we cannot understand the condition of manual scavengers. We have certain double standards. For example, we say that it is when there was this example of a villager killing a cock and frying it and eating. A villager killing a cock, his cock, cock. He killed it and fried it on this thing and ate. And people said he was a very cruel man. What is he doing? He is killing his own cock and frying it and eating. Now the question is, we don't have any problem with our barbecues, right? We don't have any problem with chicken. We don't have any problem with McDonald's, but we have a problem when a native does that, because we stereotype that certain things shouldn't be done in certain ways. No, that is not proper. And this prejudice and stereotype, it changes according to our position as well. There was a time when the United States of America supported Osama bin Laden. Later, Osama bin Laden became the terrorist. There was a time when Indira Gandhi government supported the LTTE movement. They were liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. And later, when they turned against LTTE, the Congress, the Indian National Congress, said that they are not liberation tigers, but they are terrorists. So, when our position changes, when the context changes, our prejudice, our stereotyping, our naming, everything undergoes change. What we should do is, we should not be judging anyone based on their birth, but we should judge people based on their worth. And then there won't be privileging. Privileging in the sense, quality should be privileged, right? There should be certain yardsticks for privileging, but what are those yardsticks? I don't know. But we should have discussions as what is privileged, and is there privileging? Is there something called privileging? What should be privileged? I don't know. Maybe I made a mistake when I said worth should be privileged over birth, because I was privileging something. We cannot, as Derrida, what Derrida said, we cannot escape this nature of language. It puts us into the mess. We cannot escape it. Thank you for that question, first year. Nice question, very good.
Thank you, sir. We are really amazed by your answer, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending your valuable time with us, sir. Thank you, sir.